Shalom, for those of you who are joining us on YouTube. We are now in part 4 of our Renewing Your Mind series. Up until this point, just to recap, we've been discussing what happens when a wound occurs. In the first few, we discussed how kind of there's a disillusionment with Christians because they are told that they have this redemption, right? And this redemption somehow creates within them a different person. Um, we hear Paul quoted, sorry, um, you know, uh, 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Right. I mean, you guys know I quote 2 Corinthians chapter 5 all the time. But 5:17 says, if any man be in Christ, he's a new creation. Behold, all things have become new, all things have passed away. Well, of course, obviously, the grand sentiment there is relatively antinomian and anti-Semitic in nature when we talk about it. We don't think about what that really actually literally means. So Paul says we need to renew our minds. Yahweh says man is evil from birth continually. His imaginations and his thoughts are evil from birth continually. Well, in the Hebrew, it doesn't quite read that way. But if we take evil and assign it the weak mind, the weak mind does not mean a person is less. Okay? That is something that unfortunately instantaneously occurs with our brains where we want to assign things to processes. We hear the word weak and we think of somebody who is not able to stand up for themselves. So when we're talking about this, it's very important for you to understand that a weak mind does not necessarily mean a person is less in value, okay? And the attitudes that are developed behind my term weak mind are inappropriate, okay? The attitudes of, oh, well, that's just a weak mind, and there's a dismissal and there's kind of an arrogancy as if we are strong minds, when the truth is that we are still manipulating people and we are still wounding people daily. Why? Because a majority of the time, we view humans as a resource or a threat. That's it. Okay? But you need to remember that every single last human in your circle of influence, your brain is worried about what they think of you. Okay? Don't tell yourself that's not true, because it is true. Now, here is the part that is important. Wounds are actually constructs of reality. They are fake realities that we construct as a result of damage or hurts done to us. Now, the reason why this is so important to know this is that means that whatever this person did to a person over here, or whatever this, cataclysmic event or trauma did to this person here, there is definitely a concept here of that's not the actual wound. The wound is actually made up of your personality type's way of coping with the trauma, or with the injury, or with the words that were said. Okay? But rest assured, in general, a wound is a construct of your imagination. In the first week, we asked the question, what is, or what, where, I'm sorry, who told you were naked, right? That's part one. Who told you were naked? The second part, or I'm not part, but the second area of wound discussion was, where are your accusers? And of course, we talked about judgment last week, and we talked about unjust judgment. Well, not last week, but last session. So tonight, what we need to talk about is it's not what you do, okay? So this part of the wound is the part where you do the damage. This is the dynamic. The dynamic is simple. It is not what you do that makes you who you are. If you do an action, that's not who you are. But what you believe about yourself is exactly what you'll do. If you believe you're a thief, you'll steal. If you believe you're an alcoholic, you'll drink. That willpower only lasts so long. Now, in a person who has developed a disassociation with the triggers of drinking, they could probably still call themselves an alcoholic and probably not drink. But they're also disassociated from the rest of healing, including wounds, okay? And I can tell you, as a recovery coach, I can bear witness to this truth, that it doesn't take if you don't realize a different identity, okay? I'm not trying to encroach upon people's recovery choices or steps, but what I am trying to do is say that if you believe something about yourself, you'll do it. And so let's say that now we factor in the information, right? The information that we have constructed as a result of a wound. A man strikes a woman. Let's talk a minute about this. A man strikes a woman. And so let's go through this whole scenario. First of all, in order for a man to strike a woman, he will have to have what? Overcome the social more, but also overcome his own conscience that she's the weaker vessel, that he's supposed to protect her, including from himself. Okay? And so he strikes a woman. Ask the question, what is the attitude? The attitude or the belief. What is an attitude? An attitude is a belief about how you get to treat someone else. So what is the attitude here? The attitude is it's okay to strike a woman, right? The attitude is basically kind of this idea that justifies the process, right? Attitudes are just simply our justification on how to treat people. That's it. That's the simplicity of it. So now that's communicated to the woman that she's not worth protecting. Okay? So now the woman believes that, right? And so now what does she do? She believes that she's not worth protecting. So what's she going to do? She's going to put herself in harm's way again. Okay? So the key here is, as she's putting herself in harm's way again, what is she going to attract? Somebody who has the same attitude. Why? Because she believes it about herself. This is the dynamic of it's not what you do that makes you who you are. And we are actually starting to see news articles where they are removing certain labels or speech from the realm of recovery. In fact, when I went through recovery coaching, we were not allowed to call somebody an addict, a drunk, an alcoholic, anything like that. When I went through that school, we were not allowed to do that. That was not permitted. Okay. And I'm glad that it wasn't. And I brought it up and said, hey, look, this is my philosophy. I literally believe that if you say or you believe that you are something, you'll do it. Okay. So now she surrounds herself with people that's going to hurt her. But here's the interesting dynamic that usually has to have some sort of provocation. Okay. I'm not saying it's her fault. What I'm saying is that that wound is actually causing her to instigate the process. Why? Because it's what she believes about herself. How? Because that's what the wound created, a false reality of who she is. Okay. The child who grows up and is told, you will never amount to anything, now is well into his 20s believing this about himself. So what is he actually going to do? Things that what? Don't amount to anything. So when we're talking about the wound, we ask, who told you you were naked, right? Who's the one who actually constructs the information that makes you believe the identity? You. Based upon the information you're given, because generally speaking, your circle of influence is who defines you. And you may not believe this. You may think in your mind, oh, I'm my own person. I'm very strong minded. I am not a factor of what people think about me. Well, okay. So, I mean, it's easy. It's actually, it's baloney, right? It's hogwash. It's not true. It's like you cannot go through the day without being afraid of what people think. Think about when you're in the car and all of a sudden you accidentally cut somebody off and they go by and they're flipping the bird and all that, and you have anxiety all the way home. In your mind, you have anxiety, which probably is manifesting as anger that you can't believe that that person, what, thought that about you. In the end, we define ourselves by the information coming in. And that information then becomes the dynamic of what we believe. That's why it's so important to establish an identity that is unshakable and doesn't get affected by other people's opinion. Okay? That's part of repairing the wound, as it were. All right, but there's a caveat to this, and that is that this is all happening kind of at the subconscious level. So who told you you're naked really asks the question, when did you or how did you start to believe this thing about yourself? Okay, next question. Where are your accusers? In its simplicity, you are your accuser, okay? No one else is really able to make an accusation against you, because the truth is that those accusations that say, oh, you're never amount to nothing. Oh, this is something, this is a perfect example of what I said earlier, that you have a horrible temper or whatever. Well, if you believe you have a horrible temper, then you will have a horrible temper. It's not necessarily a self-fulfilling prophecy, as it is basically the dynamic of what your brain will do as a result of how you are conditioned. Let's talk a minute about conditioning. Conditioning has two elements to it. In fact, a lot of you don't know this, but if you have psychology as a major in college, like I did, you will what? You will find out that there's actually no laws in psychology except for one called the law of effect. That means that there's actually only one provable theorem in psychology, and the rest is all speculation, which is why we have a mess on our hands. Okay. But what's interesting about psychology is that there is this guy, Pavlov, and he was a behavioral scientist. And what he did was he did an experiment to find out what can happen to an autonomic nervous system under stimulus. Okay. And the way he did it is he sewed two plastic sacks to the saliva glands on his dog, and he would feed his dog. And of course, the saliva glands would run. And what do you do when he was feeding his dog is you ring a bell. Okay. And as he rung that bell, there was a point in time where the dog would salivate even if he didn't feed it. He'd ring the bell, dog would salivate. But what was interesting is since he took the reward away, which was the rest of the biochemical process of fullness and contentment, ringing the bell eventually did not affect the dog anymore. What does that mean? That means that if you introduce a stimulus into an autonomic nervous system, it becomes memory context sensitive or triggered, right? You can even remove the reward, and for a time, you can still trigger that autonomic nervous system. What's autonomic? That's something you don't have control over. It's reflexive, as it were. Okay, now in that principle, what we have going on then is this ideal that in general, you have what? You have a stimulus with a reward conditioning you to react, okay? And then you have what? You have a desensitization if that reward isn't presented anymore. And then in addition to that, you have this idea that the stimulus can be reintroduced, the stimulus can be removed. But as long as the reward is present, there is a content, there's the biochemical process of contentment and fullness in the dog. What does that mean for us? That means that when we formulate a identity off of the opinions of others, and it is proven through process of what we would call confirmation bias, then we have a tendency to believe it unequivocally. Meaning what? It becomes reactionary. Okay. So the whole idea here is the wound is a false identity that was given to you by someone who had an attitude about you that was not wholesome, that was not from God. Okay? Now, I can tell you this is easier said than done. It's so easy to develop an attitude. You run into someone, they rub you the wrong way, you've immediately decided how you're going to treat them. Okay? But I promise you, a lot of that's probably going to be frames of references off of wounds that are already established, and therefore off of identities that already exist, and therefore off of autonomic reactions that you have no control over. Because there's a necessity to begin to create a gap between stimulus and response. Okay. The reason why we ask the question, who told you you were naked, was so that we can show you that you are the one who told you you were naked. Where are your accusers? Well, there's technically only one accuser. Why? Because generally speaking, there is not enough accurate information to determine a person's character based upon a few behaviors. Okay? So when we are starting to make decisions about humans based on a few pieces of information, we are going to check our frames of reference for reactions. not for responses. Okay. So what you believe about yourself is all about identity. Now, in the beginning of this series, I told you that if you formulate an opinion about yourself, hopefully you have listened to the right opinion. What defines a right opinion? Well, I would say it's somebody who's not wounded. I would say it's somebody who is self-actualized. And I would say it's somebody who has experienced the experience of being responsive and not reactive. Well, then I would probably add in there that that opinion about you probably needs to be a positive one. Because any negative opinion about you, you're going to formulate into a negative identity, and therefore you're going to do negative things. You see, we are high maintenance children of God, which means we're supposed to do God things. We are supposed to be God-like, right? We are supposed to do the things that gods do. But instead, what happens is we don't listen to that identity. And one of the reasons we don't is because, I don't know if you noticed, but humans don't really trust God's word. They don't trust when God says, you are this. They would rather trust what they see. They would rather trust how they're treated. Listen, if you were beat to a pulp every day when you were a kid, you probably have a false identity. Now, I'm going to just throw something out there. If you believe that false identity, you're probably going to beat people. Maybe you figured out that you can't or shouldn't use your fists, and so you beat them with your mouth. You beat them with your attitude, with your brows. You beat them with your manipulations. You see, it doesn't necessarily have to directly manifest. And what I mean by that is it doesn't have to directly show itself as it was over here. All that needs to really be seen is a pattern, right? That shows that there's a false identity in place. Now, here's the intrigue. What we would believe about ourselves is what we do, but instead we have this facade and we have this lie that we tell ourselves, and we have this lie that we tell other people, that it's actually what I do that makes me who I am. So what people will try to do good, right? So that they can feel good. When you are in a state of false identity, you have to find a way to bolster that. And that's different for every personality type. In my program, when I help people through their defects of character in their personality type, I help them understand how that dynamic works. But the principle is the false identity is created. Once the false identity is created, we will try to maintain it through illusions, right? We will try to maintain the illusion through certain control dramas, through manipulations, and through boundaries that are technically inappropriate. And don't get me wrong, there is an absolute necessity in human interaction for boundaries, because each personality type has comforts and discomforts and love languages. And so there's a necessity for assertion, and there's a necessity for boundaries. If a person doesn't have the love language of touch, but their spouse does, and they're all touchy, 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 that other person's going to be like, right? Instead of being assertive and saying, that's not my love language, and setting the boundary and saying, I don't really like to be touched, they allow it to happen, and then the resentments build up. Why? Because there's this concept of an emotional bank account. The emotional bank account, when it was first introduced, came out, I believe, really technically in the 70s, but who really brought it to the limelight was Stephen Covey. And he brought it to the limelight in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where he explained this emotional bank account, how he needed to invest in it, and his wife needed to invest in his, and his children needed to invest in his, and he needed to invest in theirs, because that meant that there would be an option to make withdrawals, right? That there would be an option to make mistakes and to fall into various adversities and be reactive to them. But then factoring in the love languages, now all of a sudden we can understand that you can actually mess up a bank account by continuing to try to invest in it the wrong thing. So you set boundaries, right? And what? Assert yourself. Yes, this is my love language. I actually really like gifts, right? That's what you would say. So asserting yourself and setting boundaries in an appropriate manner, that's what that's for, right? A person getting too close in your bubble and you saying, hey, whoa, back up. That's different than the boundaries I'm talking about. The boundaries I'm talking about is where you try to hide your false identity. You try to hide the truth that it's a false identity. How do we know? Well, because first of all, you need to know that in general, you will not produce information. You will not give feedback that matches your false identity. Because out of the abundance, the heart words come. Now, the intrigue is that it's an angry man and a drunkard who will actually tell the truth. It's not till you get angry and all of a sudden it just spews out of your mouth, and it doesn't really matter what mask you have on because it's coming out, right? You're just this supernatural, spiritual vomit all over everybody. And so it doesn't matter what mask you're wearing. So the premise is then what we have to do is kind of get to where our confession matches our walk, right? Now that's easier said than done, right? Because what do we have? We have this sentiment of hypocrisy the moment that there's a relative amount of what? Self-righteousness. The moment that you start to think you're good, that's about the time that you're going to act the fool. All right. Now, the premise of all of this is surrounded or is encased in who told you, right? You told you, but you gained that you built that information off of what you were, what information that was coming into you, right? So if a person is abusive to you or disrespectful to you, and you listen to that information as instruction, you will construct a false identity. That false identity becomes a belief, and you will do the thing that the very thing that they said. So they will say, oh, you know what? This business you're starting, it's just not going to get off the ground. You just don't have the right, you don't have the right attitude. You don't have the right resources. It's just not going to get off the ground. So if you believe that, then no matter how hard you try, no matter how much you market, no matter how much you try to get customers, no matter how much you try to manifest it, it ain't happening because you believe what they said. So what you need to ask is are they sufficient enough of an authority to be defining who you are? And the second question is are they sufficient enough, or are they worthy enough to even give an opinion? Because I will propose to you that an abuser who has defined who you are through their abuse probably doesn't have any merit to be speaking. Probably does not have a right to be defining who you are, but you will allow it. You will allow it. The wound, what? The wound augments reality. And so here's the crazy part about this. Information comes in. We accept that information, construct an identity off of it, believe that identity is real, lie to ourselves because we just learned on Shabbat that there is an absolute truth. So we lie to ourselves. And then as we're believing that that identity is true, we are doing the thing that we believe. That is the system. Okay? That is the system of action. And as a result of doing what we believe, we reinforce the belief. Here, that's the part that's crazy about it. I don't know how many people who have been out of control with their substance use who I've talked to will tell me that they use and it reinforces the belief that they are a user. When they sober up or when they come down, they actually feel like a bad person. And then that goes back to the fact that they've let down their family, they've let down their spouses, they've let down their work. And as a result of that, what is happening? They're saying, yep, that's what I am. It is what I am. And I can't change it. Maybe I could cut down a little bit. As long as you believe that that's what you are, that's what you're going to do. And I promise you that it is what you will do until there is a catalyst for change. Pain is a catalyst for change. And until that pain comes, there is no desire or need to change. And when that is true, you're going to hurt other people. You're going to. Because you're going to develop attitudes about them based upon your selfish process of using. But what about the normal person, who, has got the 9 to 5, got the good family, got the truck, got the whole gig, and is doing the thing, and every now and then flies off the handle. If you, I'm just going to go through this sequence again. It doesn't really matter how together you have it. You don't have it together if your identity is based upon a wound. I will never be like my father. That's a wound. I'm way better than my neighbor. He's making racket at 10 o'clock at night. That's a wound. That does not define who you are. Okay. So I have encouraged those who believe to go to a higher source for that information. Go to a source that is infallible. Go to a source that cannot be tempted by a false identity. Okay. That's the identity that you need to, or that's the source that you need to believe the opinion about. And that's the one who's worthy to be given the opinion in the first place. So here's the part. If we do what we believe about ourselves, and that is negative, like kind attracts like kind. Now, here's the part that really sucks. This is the part that's unfortunate. So you have the person who is wounded, and now they are carrying out their identity through action. And that action is different for each personality type. It might be words, it might be actions, it might be, inaction. It might be aloofness. It might be a victim stance. It might be a intimidation. It doesn't really matter how it comes out. It's going to, because a false identity does not have the ability to put out an authentic behavior. A false identity will always put out counterfeit behavior. And counterfeit behavior is attractive to someone else who's wounded. In its simplicity, the way that this works is basically that a wounded person who has a false identity is going to trap themselves into that identity. So let's say we take a thief, for example, okay? We take a thief, for example, who believes that they are a thief, and so they're going to steal. What are they going to attract to themselves? Somebody who feels they deserve to be stolen from. Scary, right? Because now what happens? Now we have this bond that occurs where the thief now has the opportunity to steal from the person who believes that they deserve to be stolen from because of some victimization in the past that has caused them to believe that. So they're putting their stuff out there to be stolen, right? That's the premise. And then what happens? Now, this person has reinforced their damage, and this person has reinforced their damage. Now, I know there are people out there to be like, whoa, 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 whoa. So you're saying that a person who has an issue with, say, I don't know, cocaine, will attract somebody who feels like they need to give up their cocaine? Kind of, in a way, yeah. Yeah, that's the principle. It's a little bit more dynamic than that. It's not static. Okay. None of this stuff I'm saying is static. This is not black and white where it's this way or that way. There's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of dynamic, a lot of movement to this. Okay. It is insane the level of brokenness of this world as a result of these false identities. And if you factor in the fact that God said in Psalm 82, you are Elohim, then when it says in this week's Parasha, you shall have no other gods in my face. And that word other is false, right? Is a different God. What if the premise is that he did not want you to put your false identities in his face? What do I mean by that? I mean, people have the nerve to pray according to their wounds, to worship according to their wounds. Thank God I am not like that tax collector. Right? That's that principle. They surround their brain with reinforcement of their wound and then attach religiosity to it. And dear God in heaven, we get a whole denomination that's a mess. It is insane how damaged this world actually is, because we are just going through the motions of maintaining that false identity that we should have never, ever believed in the first place. Now, having said that, we did. We believed it. And we have a tendency to continue to believe it. Okay? You have no idea the level of interactions you have during the day that fall through the filters of your wounds and your reactions to people are directly related to it. And by the time you get home, you're an absolute mess and you can't figure out why. You think back over the day and you're like, yeah, that guy cut me off. Yeah, that person was cursing out the cashier. Oh yeah, you know what? That jerk at work, he's always talking about his wife badly. When in reality, you probably attracted every one of those things to you as a result of the fact that they themselves have that damage that matches your mess. So why? Why is this type of a thing happening? Well, there's two reasons. The first reason is because no one wants to get better. We spend our days, like I said, we spend our days looking at people as if they are a resource or a threat. Everything I can get out of this person by stealing their energy, everything I can get out of this person by manipulating them, everything I can get out of this person by being nice to them, right? Oh, that person, arm's length, they're a threat, they're no good, they're a mess, okay? I actually was witness to this today where there was a false impression of someone, and that false impression created that threat mechanism, okay? Now, here's the important part of this. We all do it. Even Rabbi Q does it, okay? I don't like how something's going and I become reactive and immediately drop into my wounds, and that reaction is not healthy. And in those moments, what have I done? Well, I'm attracting that mess that I talked about, right? But also, in general, I'm setting those fake boundaries, which is showing an inauthentic behavior, an inauthentic way of dealing with things, a counterfeit way of dealing with things. But I'm also basically exposing the false identity. For anybody who could actually pick up on it and see it, they would see. Why? Because there's still wounds that define me that I have not healed from, that are going to create bad information to the world. Bad information that then is going to go somewhere else and define somebody else and become a behavior. Do you see how sick it is? It just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes. Wound, right? Information, identity, behavior, wound. And now it's a new one. It's a new generation of wounds. And the ripple effect is so powerful. And I mean, if you knew how much it follows the path of least resistance and how much it can just rip through a society, rip through a group of people, through friends, through family. So how do we fix it? Well, there's a point in time where you need to realize that you have warning signals. You have things that let you know that you have triggered. It will take time to learn what those are. Mine generally is anger. If I feel angry, something is wrong. And it's not about anger, ever. In fact, I don't think I have identified in self-introspection in the past 3 years legitimate anger. Maybe once or twice. It's either frustration because of a breakdown in communication that happens so easily with my brain, or it's hurt, betrayal, right? But the problem is that since my brain knows that in order for someone to treat me a certain way, they have to have a certain attitude about me, then I realize that they are trying to formulate a false identity about me, right? And so then I become reactive, like, how could you? I feel betrayed, right? It's one of the unfortunate things about knowing this is you take a whole lot of stuff personal because you know what junk they're operating in. It's insane. It's almost like being able to see the code in the matrix. It doesn't make it any easier because you can also see, you look in the mirror and there's code and you're like, oh geez, I'm it too. So how do we get through this? Well, there's two things that I think are very important. The first one is if you seek to leave every situation better than you found it, most likely you're not going to operate in your wounds. You will countermind your wounds. You will completely countermind your wounds. The second is that you need to remember that until you self-actualize, until you have an internal locus of control, until you find yourself, as it were, and really step into your identity and understand it, you're going to do it. And most likely, it's going to injure. It's amazing how quickly a good day can go from a good day to a bad day as a result of a wound trigger. Because there's something interesting about it. And here's some insight into wounds that a lot of people don't know. Every single time there's a wound trigger, you have to reconvince yourself that that identity is true. So let me explain how this works. Your personality and temperament reacted to some sort of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, okay, of a need. When you made an adjustment in your brain to compensate for it, that's different for every personality type, that's different for every temperament. You began to basically have a way to deal with it, and that way had to work because cognitive dissonance was going to exist until you fixed it. Listen, when your brain becomes uncomfortable, you will move, and you will move until it's comfortable again. Even if that means creating a number of personalities, even if that means suicide, even if that means abusing substances, even if that means abusing somebody else, even if that means not using nature in the way in which nature was intended to be used. So the injury occurs. Now there is a trigger attached to it, memory context sensitive trigger, meaning what? As soon as that memory is triggered, it doesn't matter where you are, who you're with. Once it's triggered, you are presented again with the question, is it true? And at that moment, you have to maintain the illusion. And the lower in health you are mentally, the more of a weak mind you are, the harder it's going to, the easier it's going to be to do that. The higher you are, the more actualized you are, the more you have an internal locus of control, the more you feel that life is happening for you and not to you, you will go, that's not true. That's actually not true. I'm not that thing. And the trigger will lose its power. Now, that's not true all the time because there's some deep-seated triggers. Oh my gosh. Some of the people who I have worked through with timeline therapy or some other NLP technique and dug deep to try to get at some of those triggers. Oh my gosh, it's like pulling teeth. It's easy to leave every situation better than you found it. You already look for the deficit in order to manipulate people. You already look for the deficit in order to determine if somebody's a threat. You already look for the deficit to determine what their resource is. Do you see this? There is a premise here that you actually already have the tools to make a situation better if you choose to do it. Okay? For example, how many times have you wanted something or had some sort of desire for something and asserted yourself in a way that you never would because you wanted that thing? Let's say that it's a guy and he is found this lady attractive. Now, there's a few things right off the bat that he has to do. First of all, he has to put his best foot forward, right? He can't show her his wounds. And so he's got to create this identity that has this desirability to it, right? Because God forbid they actually know the authenticity of the person. And so now they go and they're like, hey, man, you're looking really good. You want to get a drink with me or something? And they're bold in it, right? They'll step out and they'll be like, oh, yeah, let me present my best self and let me assert myself. You're desirable. I would like you. Come to me, right? Well, how hard is it then to see the person in a state of dysfunction in a restaurant, a store, right? At church, and go up and be like, hey, you okay? With the same boldness, with the same gusto, right? The woman who can be like, you kind of car do you drive, right? And that same woman now is not willing to approach somebody in need because there's a relative amount of embarrassment or fear that they're not going to get it right. Are you serious? You are able to totally dismiss a man, and you cannot approach a person who's hurting. Leave every situation better than you found it, and you will not operate in your wounds. Careful, though, because your ego will tell you, oh, you left that situation better than you found it. Look at you, you're a good person. Which will what? Bolster that false identity that's already present in you. There's an element of vulnerability that could overcome a lot of this stuff. If you didn't set the boundaries, if you didn't say, oh, you know what, don't talk to me like that. Oh, you know what, don't make that noise. That noise, it just always gets to me. Wound. You don't know why it's a wound, but I promise you it's a wound. Because most of the time, when cognitive dissonance is presented, which is basically a discomfort in your brain that something is off or wrong, there's a reason for it that has nothing to do with healthy operation. Our wounds, in and of themselves, have created so much damage that the healing that needs to occur in this world as a result of it is astronomical. But I'm going to tell you a secret. If you don't start reconstructing your identity, probably need to deconstruct it first. But if you don't start reconstructing your identity, you are just going to create another generation of the wounded, because you will treat your children the way you were treated. You will treat your spouse the way your mother was treated or your father was treated. You will treat your coworkers the way your friends were treated in school, you will treat everybody the way that you were treated. I'm sorry, the way your friends treated you in school. What's my point? My point is there needs to be change. Now, here's the part that's difficult. Pain is a catalyst for change. Pain is the only time that we will want to augment the mechanisms, the processes that are automatically firing and doing their thing. Because pain interrupts comfort. And as long as you're comfort in your processes, you will continue them. There's no reason not to. Our brains are lazy. Follow the path of least resistance, get as much comfort as fast as possible, because discomfort creates a sense of insecurity, vulnerability, and danger. We can actually think that something is dangerous because of the fact that it's not within our comfort zone. Diversity, difference, change looks uncomfortable. So I guess the next big question is, because we're going to wrap up this wound thing. A, is it worth it to become vulnerable, to heal, to step away from the damage, to stop augmenting your reality and trying to maintain a false reality that's just a bunch of illusion? It's that idea of, if you are balancing a bunch of plates and they're all spinning, right? If even one of those falls, the whole thing crashes down, and here you are totally exposed that you were what? Inauthentic. That you were being a counterfeit. Here's the interesting thing. If we are indeed Elohim, as it says in Psalm 82, if we are indeed Elohim, and we are a counterfeit, then what are we? Right? Do you see the definition there kind of looming in the background? You know, on Shabbat this last week, we discussed the Hebrew word for what is an actual name in the Bible, Satan, or Ha-Satan, the adversary. And we discussed how there's an adversarial element to propagating negative energy as a result of what? Of a negative polarization, of receiving of energy, negatively polarizing it and putting it back out. And so the premise is that you are actually becoming adversarial to the divine through the process of bad energy. Well, welcome to the core of it. The false identity that you maintain, setting boundaries, experiencing anxieties about people seeing that or seeing that exposed. I have people in my life, in my circle of influence, who have gone through a number of things that have really challenged their identity with who they are in terms of the definition in their Bible or who they are in terms of the definition of what other people say they are. In fact, some of the people have gone through it so thoroughly that they are in a constant state of questioning who they are. And they're in a constant state of questioning their worth and merit, right? Their desert. What do they deserve? Because people, wounded people who think they got it all together, are defining them through their wounds, through their filters. Remember, your brain deletes, generalizes, and distorts all information that comes in as a result of frames of reference that are the result of false experiences. Remember, when someone is abusive, that is a false experience. What do I mean by that? That is not the truth about you. If you were exploited, if you were neglected, or you were abused, that is not who you are. But if you believe it, if you say, if you wear your victimization on your sleeve, right here, that's what happened to me. See, I'm wounded. I have a owie. I was hurt this way back then. Then instantaneously, you have identified you don't want to heal. And quite frankly, it might be time for people to start distancing themselves from you. I love the people who walk around and they say, I am bipolar. Well, yes, you are. What was your name? Right? They say that as an identity. They believe it about themselves. But who told you you were bipolar? Right? And so as a result of that, yes, no, I get what psychology claims to understand about biomedical chemical imbalances. Okay? I do. But I will propose to you that if you say that you are, you will do manic depressive things. You say, I have multiple personality disorder. Yes, you do. Why? Because you say that that's your identity. And so you are going to what? Have multiple personalities. Now, I know that that flies in the face of a lot of stuff. You know, people go through a lot of junk and they arrive at the clinics and they arrive at the hospitals and they arrive at the counseling centers, and the counselor goes through a whole bunch of psychometrics and a whole bunch of different things to try to figure out what's wrong with you. But the truth is that somewhere along the line, somebody needs to figure out what's right with you, promote that, right? And show you that you're more than those false identities. And I'll bet you don't need medication anymore. I will bet you don't need counseling anymore. In fact, I will bet you become a counselor. And you start showing people how to fix their identity. When we understand that saying you are something means that you will do that thing. And when you do that thing, most likely as a result of the fact that it's counterfeit, it's going to be negative energy. And if it's negative energy, then you're going to be out of adversarial. But now I'm going to throw something more out there. You are going to develop an attitude about someone else and treat them that way, and they're going to believe that identity. It's horrible. And it's really difficult to remedy. It's really difficult to remedy because we have confirmation bias. We have seen evidence that it's true when it's not. Okay. I think I've beat this dead horse enough to say that it's not what you do that defines who you are, but what you believe about yourself, you're going to do. And I promise you, if it is a counterfeit self, you are going to do counterfeit things, and those counterfeit things are going to cause damage. They're going to. Because the truth is that sooner or later, that's going to result in some sort of betrayal. There's going to be some sort of moment when the lies are going to come out, and all of a sudden people are going to be like, oh man, is that true? You've been presenting this facade. You could have told us, right? Guys, you need to understand the psychosomatic power of suggestion. That you could actually have a disease, or you could actually have a ailment come upon you as a result of believing what you are. And now all of a sudden you have a disease, or you have a physical limitation, you have some sort of problem with your organs or with your body, and it's because you believed what you were told about who you are. Now, does that mean that we just completely throw out and exclude diagnoses? No, that's not what I'm saying. Somewhere along the lines, listen, Rabbi Q even uses psychometrics. But what am I trying to find? I'm trying to find where you are mixed up so I can start to help you see that identity. You schedule a session with me, the first thing I'm going to do is run you through some psychometrics. It's going to seem like a therapy session. But the truth is what I'm figuring out is all your false identities, so I can start ripping them down. So I can start digging into them. So that and there are so many people that are like, oh, I hate it when you do this. Of course you do. There's a dissonance there. I'm digging, right? The reason why that's so effective is because it's getting rid of the counterfeit and presenting this new, amazing, healed human. Takes a lot of time, takes a lot of resources, it takes a lot of willingness to be broken, vulnerable, etc. And I could tell you, I'm not all the way through it, but I feel like I have arrived at enough of an effectiveness in it to help other people get out of it. But in the end, I catch myself all the time manipulating this person, rejecting this person because they're a threat, disrespecting this person because they're not worthy of my respect, etc. When the truth is that Yeshua showed us a path that contains the healthy state that we're supposed to be operating in, regardless of the adversity that's coming in. What's supposed to emanate from us is the very things that we are wounded in. What do I mean by that? I mean that your wound, once it is healed from, will become your ministry. It will. Your wound, once you've overcome it, will now become what? Your responsibility to teach others how to overcome it. So, in summary of the wound, because we're going to move on to limiting beliefs next. In summary of the wound, who told you were naked? You did. In other words, who created the wound? You did. not the action that did the damage, but who created the wound, who created the perpetuation of that darkness. You did, not them. Okay? With your brain, your mind creating what? A false identity and a false reality and maintaining it every single time it triggers. Okay? Where are your accusers? Right here. And if they don't have viable evidence, you need to kick it to the curb. If there's viable evidence, then get a clear conscience. Fix it, right? Give restitution. Bear repentance, right? It's not what you believe, it's not what you do that makes you who you are. You walk down the road and spit on the sidewalk, you're not a spitter. But if you believe you're a spitter, you'll spit on the sidewalk. Gross. So the point is, right, that you are what? You are made up of not your actions, but of your beliefs about who you are, which is what? Summarized in the information you've been given. Quite frankly, you've been believing the wrong people who do not deserve to be honored in their opinion, people who exploited you, neglected you, or abused you. Those people, they don't deserve an opinion. I'm sorry. They have not demonstrated themselves worthy. Do yourself a favor, try to find somebody who is not damaged to give the opinion. Good luck with that. Last time I checked, he came, went, now he's up in the air somewhere, right? You need to go to a higher authority for your identity, because then you will do the things that he says you are. Oh, wouldn't that be nice? He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. I'm the righteousness of God. Oh my gosh, what that would do to a world. If somebody would actually believe that, do the things that a righteousness of God does, right? Okay, so I understand. Listen, I know that there are people out there who have been hurt more than me. And I know that there are people out there who have hurt people more than me. Okay? But I've had enough experience in pain to understand the need for your wound to be validated, the need for you to go to a therapist and talk about what happened. Okay? I understand that that hurts. I understand that there is within you a lot of turmoil and angst and anxiety and other negative emotions, and it's not fair. Okay? It's not fair that you were treated that way. It's not fair that now has defined you. But I'm going to tell you a greater injustice, and that is if you perpetuate it and if you continue to believe it and you continue to live in it. There is a much, much more suitable, more comfortable, more contenting path. There's more shalom, more peace, more comfort in the healing. Now, I think anybody who's anybody knows that that healing is going to require you to go through in order to get out. Not around, not over, not pretend like it's not there, not make it go away with substances, not perpetuate it by hurting others, which is just a side effect of perpetuating it. Just so you know, I'm speaking from experience here. A side effect of your wound is hurting others. I don't know how to explain this any more simpler than you will do it. I don't care what you think about yourself. I don't care if you think you're the most benevolent, kind individual. I promise you, if you're perpetuating your wound, you have done so much damage. And when you finally wake up, all of a sudden you're going to see it. And you're going to go to people and be like, I did not know. How about we stop now? How about we stop now? Easier said than done. I'm not trying to invalidate your wound. I'm not trying to invalidate what happened to you. Your experience is yours and you experienced it. It's authentic. Okay. And I believe that experience overrides any other doctrinal, um, uh, hogwash from another person. Okay. You can read the Bible all day long. You still have an owie. I promise you the Bible is invalidated. So I know that there is a disillusionment in the fact that you're a person who names the name of Christ and therefore technically defined as a Christian. You're somebody who has sought to change and be that new creation, but something has caused you to feel like maybe you're not saved, or maybe you're not redeemed, or maybe you are unsavable. Maybe you're one of those people who has been a Christian and has quit being a Christian and stopped believing in God because of the damage. I'm going to tell you something. The way we treat God is the way we treat humans. And I can almost guarantee you, if you've disassociated yourself that much from God, you've probably disassociated yourself that much from your spouse, from your children. I get that there is pain. And I'm not trying to be incompassionate. I'm not trying to be crass or heartless. What I'm saying is, you don't realize the damage you're doing. You need to do something about that. Wounds beget wounds. Like kind attracts like kind. Healed people attract healed people, or attract people who need to be healed. So, in the end, your wound is not who you are. Okay? Right. Shalom. For those of you who are on YouTube, you have a good week, good 2 weeks until the next session. And we will be back again. We're going to talk about limiting beliefs. Limiting beliefs. Remember, there's limiting beliefs and lack of imagination that we still need to cover. Limiting beliefs and lack of imagination. Okay. And remember, those are the things that need to be renewed in our mind. Okay. All right. Shalom for those of you who are on YouTube.